Hello human beings, Power Gamer here, and in continuation of my war against chickens, I've started a cockfighting organization.
One cockfight later.
Well, that didn't go very well. Turns out getting a bunch of wild animals to fight for your amusement isn't as easy as it sounds. I guess I'll just play some Pokemon instead.
Pokemon. Yeah, it's a pretty big series. You might have heard of it. It's not like it's the highest grossing media franchise of all time or anything. Seriously, everyone knows about Pokemon at this point. From the video games to the trading cards, the anime, the merchandise that I'm pretty sure there's more of than there are people on the planet, Pokemon has been permanently ingrained in pop culture since its release in the 90s.
I've been a Pokemon fan for almost as long as I can remember. I first got into it through the trading cards thanks to my brother and a family friend. Then I started watching the anime when I was about 4, and when I was 7 I finally got a chance to play the games. And ever since, it has been one of, if not my favorite video game franchise of all time. I freaking love Pokemon, and today we're going back to where it all began.
Pokemon was originally designed by Satoshi Tajiri, who spent most of his childhood catching and collecting bugs, so he wanted to create a game that would give kids a similar feeling. He pitched the concept to Nintendo in 1990, but many of the staff members thought his idea was too ambitious and unappealing. However, Shigeru Miyamoto saw the potential a game like this had and convinced them to greenlight the game. Tajiri believed the Game Boy would be the perfect system for it thanks to its link cable, which allows players to connect 2 separate game cartridges together. He envisioned this as allowing the players to trade their Pokemon with each other. Miyamoto then suggested making multiple versions of the game that would each contain different Pokemon. Most of the creatures were designed by Ken Sugimori, a longtime friend of Tajiri, and the music was composed by Junichi Masuda. The game was published by Nintendo and developed by Game Freak. There were multiple prototype names, including Kapumon and Kapumon, but the name Pokemon eventually came from the Japanese words Pokemonsuno, or pocket monsters. Both versions of the game, titled Pokemon Red version and Pokemon Green version, were released in Japan on February 27th, 1996, where they sold tremendously well. So much so that a third version, titled Pokemon Blue version, was released on October 10th later that year. It was the same game, but with a few different Pokemon and updated sprites. They then took that Blue version and created 2 new versions of Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, which were the same as the original Red and Green, but with Blue version sprites. These versions were released in North America on September 28th, 1998, with Europe and Australia getting it later on. These games were a monster success, selling over 47.5 million copies, making them to this day one of the best-selling video games of all time. Pokemon ended up spawning a trading card game that was also a monster hit, an anime series that's still going to this day, and more merchandise than anyone knows what to do with. Pokemon was everywhere in the late 90s. You couldn't go 5 minutes without hearing or seeing something about it, and the franchise is still making boatloads of cash even today.
Now this is part of what's known as Generation 1 of Pokemon, and I didn't get into the series until Generation 4, which came out on the DS, so I didn't play Red and Blue until they were re-released on the 3DS Virtual Console. I played both versions, and while I did have fun, I had some problems with it. Either way, now that I own an actual physical copy of it, I'm excited to give it another shot, although for the sake of this review, I'll only be playing Red version, since I'm not playing through the game twice.
The game takes place in the world of Pokemon, which is just kind of its own separate world. You're immediately greeted by Professor Oak, a scientist who studies Pokemon creatures for research. You take control of this 10-year-old boy, and much like Link from Zelda, you can name him whatever you want, but canonically he's known as Red. Yeah, I'm just calling him Aidan. You also meet your rival and Professor Oak's grandson, who canonically is named Blue. Very clever with these names. Though I think most kids who played this game either named him Gary because of the anime, or something inappropriate like Asshead. Personally, I'm gonna be a bit classier and just call him James. Think that name fits well for him. Anyways, you start in your bedroom playing an SNES before heading downstairs and speaking with your mother. According to her, it's time for you to leave home and start your Pokemon journey at the incredibly wise and mature age of 10. Professor Oak has agreed to give you and James Pokemon, but he's not in his lab. You literally have to put your life in danger by walking into tall grass to get his attention. He takes you back to his lab, and you have to choose from one of 3 Pokemon to take on your journey. Bulbasaur, a grass type, Charmander, a fire type, or Squirtle, a water type. And personally, I chose Charmander, since it's my favorite. Yeah, I know, I'm lame. James then takes the starter Pokemon that has the type advantage against yours and challenges you to a battle, which just serves as a tutorial. After running a quick delivery by picking up a parcel for Oak in the next town, he gives you and James 2 Pokedexes, which are devices that automatically record data on Pokemon you've caught. Oak asks you and James to travel across the region and catch all 151 known Pokemon to record data on them. And with that, you're off. But catching Pokemon isn't the only objective. In fact, it's more of a side objective. Your main goal is to travel across the region known as Kanto, which is inspired by the real-world Kanto region of Japan, and find the 8 towns which contain gyms. Inside each gym is a gym leader who specializes in one specific type of Pokemon. Sort of. We'll get more into that later. If you defeat them, you'll earn a special gym badge. Once you collect all 8, you can travel to the Pokemon League on Indigo Plateau, where you can face off against the Elite Four, the strongest trainers in the entire region. If you beat them, you become the Pokemon League champion, making you the strongest trainer in the entire world, or region.
So while Professor Oak tells you to catch all 151 Pokemon and complete the Pokedex, your actual goal is to just beat all the gyms and become champion.
The plot is as basic as you can get, but since this was a kid's game released for the Game Boy, that's understandable. And the characters are incredibly one-note. Red never speaks since he's just a vessel for you, and Blue,
James,
is as simple as possible. He's a cocky jerk who's always one step ahead of you, so you gotta put him in his place by beating him. He pops up a handful of times throughout the game, but these don't do much in terms of story. The only real plot element of the game is early on you encounter a gang called Team Rocket, a criminal organization that steals Pokemon for money and power. All this really boils down to is you having to fight a bunch of their members called grunts whenever they show up. The game itself is an RPG, like Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. You travel around the world looking for Pokemon to fight. Most of them are found in the wild in places like tall grass, water, or in caves. When you encounter a Pokemon, you send out one of your own to fight it. In the wild, you can either defeat it for some experience, or you can throw a Pokeball to try and catch it. If you succeed, that Pokemon is now yours to keep, although you don't get any experience. There's 3 types of Pokeballs, each with varying strength: Pokeballs, Great Balls, and Ultra Balls. Pokemon use a plethora of moves and attacks. The moves they use and the Pokemon themselves all fall under a certain type. Pokemon can have either 1 or 2 types, while moves only have 1. There are 15 total types in the game: Grass, Fire, Water, Electric, Normal, Fighting, Psychic, Bug, Flying, Ghost, Rock, Ground, Poison, Ice, and Dragon. Each type has different strengths and weaknesses that affect how much damage an attack does. For example, with the starters, Grass is good against Water, Fire is good against Grass, and Water is good against Fire. Moves that are stronger against a type are super effective, meaning they do double damage, while moves that are weaker are not very effective, meaning they do half as much damage. And some types are just flat out immune to other ones, like Ground is immune to Electric and Ghost is immune to Normal, so it just flat out won't do anything. Most types that are strong against another one offensively also resist it defensively, but that's not always the case. Like Ice is super effective against Flying, but it's not resisted by it, and Rock is resisted by Normal, but it's not super effective against it.
The key to winning battles in Pokemon is to find out which types are good against each other.
Pokemon can learn moves that don't fall into their type. However, if a Pokemon uses an attack that does match their type, they receive a same type attack bonus, or stab, which is a 1.5 boost to the move's power. So a fire type using a fire type move will do more damage than, say, a dragon type using a fire type move. But because some Pokemon have more than one type, that can affect its defenses even more since both types stack together. For example, Onix is a rock type and a ground type, and both types are weak to water. So that means if an Onix is hit with a water type move, it'll do 4 times as much damage as it normally would. Butterfree is a bug type and a flying type, and both types resist grass. So if a Butterfree is hit with a grass type move, it'll only do a quarter of its normal damage. And Lapras is a water type which resists fire, and an ice type which is weak to fire. Both of these cancel each other out, so a fire move used on Lapras will be neutral. And immunities completely overshadow weaknesses, so Aerodactyl is immune to ground moves because it's a flying type, even though it's also a rock type which is weak to ground.
The type of the move isn't the only thing you have to worry about, though. Each one has its own inherent properties.
Each attack has its own base power level and number of power points. Every time you use an attack, 1 power point is depleted, and once they run out, you can't use it again until you restore them. Generally, the stronger the attack, the fewer the power points it has. Attacks can also have secondary effects that make them better, like lowering an opponent's stats, causing them to flinch, meaning they can't move for a turn, or having an increased critical hit ratio. Critical hits are when the moves does increased damage, but it happens at random. The chances of a critical hit happening is determined by a Pokemon's base speed stats, so the faster the Pokemon is, the more times they'll get it. Stronger attacks typically have something that holds them back, so you're not constantly using them. This could include having fewer power points, doing recoil damage so it hurts to use them, or having lowered accuracy so the moves are more likely to miss. But on top of the attacks themselves, you also have to think about how they match your Pokemon's stats. Every Pokemon has 5 base stats: health, attack, defense, special, and speed. Health is self-explanatory. Speed determines which Pokemon goes first in battle, and the others determine how much damage they give or take. Every attack is either physical or special, and which one it is determined by its type. Types like normal, fighting, and ground are all physical, while types like fire, electric, and ice are all special. Most of these make sense, like fighting being physical or psychic being special, but some of them are just ridiculous. Like, why the hell is ghost physical? That makes no sense. Unfortunately, while physical attack and physical defense are separate, special is just one stat. This makes the game really unbalanced, since it means the Pokemon with a high special stat are great at both dealing special damage and taking special damage, while a Pokemon with a low special stat is bad at both.
This isn't a game-breaking issue, but it does lead to the game being pretty unbalanced.
But not all of the attacks do direct damage. Many of them are referred to as status moves, which affect the battle in other ways. The most common ones are moves that raise the stat of the Pokemon using it or lower the stats of the opponent. Along with the stats I already discussed, you can also change the Pokemon's evasion or accuracy, which increase or decrease your chance of landing an attack, but many of them will also give an opponent a status condition. Status conditions are effects that either harm the Pokemon or prevent them from battling. There's poison, which causes the Pokemon to take damage at the end of every turn, and if you get poisoned, you still take damage from walking around the overworld. Burn also causes damage and halves the Pokemon's physical attack. Paralysis halves the Pokemon's speed and gives them a 25% chance of not moving. Sleep makes the Pokemon unable to do anything until they wake up, and Confusion gives the Pokemon a 50% chance of hitting themselves instead of the opponent. And by that I mean there's about a 20% chance of the computer Pokemon hitting themselves and a 75% chance of your Pokemon hitting themselves. The graphics for this game are really simple, but that's excusable for the Game Boy. It's not amazing, but it's fine enough. Although due to some hardware limitations, they had to reuse a bunch of stuff like these generic icons for the sprites, and every item in the overworld is just a Pokeball. And man, these Pokemon sprites. I mean, some of them look fine, but others just look ridiculous. Yeah, I know the hardware was limited, but come on, some of these are just downright hilarious. I mean, Tangela's eyes are tiny, Geodude's head looks more like a weird hairstyle than rock, Wigglytuff is terrifying, Omastar is striking a pose, Tentacruel just looks grumpy, and what the hell is going on with Golbat? Battle effects are also really simple, and many attacks just reuse the same animations. And the music is well composed, but since it's a Game Boy game, it's also very compressed. And when a Pokemon is low on health, almost all of the sound is replaced with this annoying beeping, and it gets ear-grating really fast.
But I've somehow gone this far without mentioning one of Pokemon's most defining features: evolution.
As your Pokemon gains experience, it'll level up and get stronger, and once most of them reach a certain level, they'll evolve into more powerful forms. This causes their stats to increase, can add additional types, and lets them learn new moves. Each Pokemon has a predetermined list of moves they can learn. Many of them are learned by simply leveling up, but a Pokemon's real moveset comes from technical machines, or TMs. TMs allow you to teach a move to a Pokemon that it wouldn't normally learn. This is what primarily allows them to get moves of a different type, but you can only use each one once, so you gotta be certain about which move you teach to which Pokemon. And while you can buy extras for some, most of them you only get one of them. You primarily find them out in the open, but you also get one for beating each gym. TMs are what really make or break a Pokemon in terms of usefulness, since there are barely any moves in Generation 1. Most Pokemon get no additional type coverage by level up, and some of them barely get any good stab moves. And even if they do, some don't learn them until a ridiculously high level. Flamethrower is the best fire type move in the game, and most fire types don't learn it until at least level 50, which you likely won't be until right before the Pokemon League.
However, TMs aren't the only way to learn additional moves. There's also 5 hidden machines, or HMs.
HMs work differently from TMs for multiple reasons, with the first big one being that they all have secondary effects for use in the overworld, and most of them are mandatory to beat the game, although you can't use them until you beat a specific gym. Cut lets you cut down trees, Flash lights up dark caves, Fly lets you return to previously visited towns, Strength lets you move boulders, and Surf lets you travel across water. The second difference is that because these are mandatory, HMs don't break, so you can use them as many times as you want. But the third and worst difference is that once you learn them, you can't get rid of them. Each Pokemon can only learn 4 moves, and if you want to learn another one, you have to delete one it already knows. For the most part, this isn't a big deal, but HMs for some baffling reason cannot be deleted. So you better be 100% certain you want to teach a Pokemon an HM move because it's stuck with it for good. Now, some of the HMs are useful in battle. Strength is a solid normal type move, Fly can be useful, and Surf is the best water type move in the game. But Cut is pretty weak, and Flash is next to useless. So you'll likely want to teach those to other Pokemon you aren't using in battle. But you can only have 6 Pokemon on your team at once, and any more you catch gets sent to the PC. So this means you'll have to keep running back and forth just to manage your HM Pokemon.
HMs are by far the worst thing about Pokemon games. They're not a fun puzzle you have to figure out, they're just an annoying hindrance, and I genuinely don't know anyone who actually likes them.
Almost every town has a Pokemon Center, which fully restores both your health and power points, and unlike most RPGs, it's completely free to use them, so this game clearly doesn't take place in America. They're only in towns though, with a couple exceptions, so if you're venturing out and need to heal your Pokemon, you either need to run all the way back, or stock up on potions which you can buy from a Pokemart. There are ethers and elixirs which restore power points, but you can't buy them, so you want to be careful about when you use them. On routes in between cities, you'll find a bunch of trainers you have to fight if you walk in front of them. Most of them are mandatory, but there are some trainers you can just ignore. Trainer fights are similar to fighting Pokemon in the wild, only you can't catch the Pokemon or run away. Most RPGs make it difficult to run from encounters, but here, it's easy to run away from wild Pokemon, while trainers you have to fight. In return, the trainers' Pokemon are generally higher levels than the wild Pokemon in the area, so they give more experience. Beating trainers also gives you money, which you can use to buy items. You'll want to fight as many trainers as possible, since it helps cut down on grinding. This game can have some pretty big level jumps. It's not too crazy, but there are a number of moments where a major fight will have significantly stronger Pokemon than the one right before it, and there's no clever strategy to beating them. Type matchups don't mean anything when your level isn't high enough, so there is nothing else you can do other than grind. And if all your Pokemon faint, you lose the battle and half of your money.
Nowadays, a lot of people complain that Pokemon games are too easy, but honestly, they've always been easy. As long as your Pokemon are a similar level to what you're fighting and you know your type matchups, you'll be fine. The only thing the older games did to make the games harder was to just make the Pokemon a higher level, which doesn't actually add challenge, it just makes the game take longer to play.
In fact, I'd say Gen 1 is one of the easiest Pokemon games to beat because the AI for the trainers is awful. So many times they'll spam moves that don't do damage, use a weaker move for no reason, or try to heal while their Pokemon has completely full health. The only real challenge for this game besides the level curve is how unbalanced it is. I already mentioned the issues with the special stat, but some types in this game are clearly better than others. Psychic types in particular are incredibly broken. Not only do almost all of them have high special stats, but they have virtually no weaknesses. The only types Psychic is weak to are Bug and Ghosts. Bug types just flat out suck, since all of them are incredibly weak except for Scyther and Pinsir, which literally learn no bug moves, not even by TM. And the only Ghost types in the game are part of one evolutionary line, Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar, which aren't great for 3 reasons. The first is that the Ghost attacks are physical and they have a bad attack stat. The second is the only Ghost type moves in the game are Lick, Nightshade, and Confuse Ray. Lick is weak, Nightshade does a set amount of damage, so it can't be super effective, and Confuse Ray is a status move. So Lick is the only Ghost move that can do super effective damage against a Psychic type, but there's a glitch in the game so that Lick instead does nothing against a Psychic type. So they're supposed to be weak to it, but they're actually immune. And the third reason is that all 3 of these Pokemon are poison types, meaning they are weak to Psychic. So they're supposed to be good against Psychic types, but they're actually bad against them. If you want to snap the game in half, just use an Alakazam. You'll be unstoppable.
The Generation 1 Pokemon games are also some of the most glitchy and broken games I have ever played in my entire life.
I already mentioned how Lick doesn't hit Psychic types, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Every move has a 1 in 256 chance of missing, even if it has 100 accuracy. There's this weird badge boost glitch where any stat-changing move used on your Pokemon late in the game buffs all of its stats. Focus Energy is a move that's supposed to increase the Pokemon's critical hit ratio, but it actually lowers it. I had this part where a woman just appeared in a wall, and do I even need to bring up the famous missing no glitch? There was also this part where the game played the wrong cry. That's supposed to be for Ghastly, not Abra. Even the text is glitched. I already talked about how types stack, but the text doesn't seem to know that. So if a Pokemon has one type weak to a move, but another that resists it, the actual damage given is neutral, but the text will say either not very effective or super effective. This game also has a problem with how long things can take. For starters, you walk pretty slowly, and while you do get a bike later on that lets you move faster, it can only be used outdoors. You can only hold 20 items at once, so you need to manage those with your PC as well as your Pokemon. Battles can take a while because of things like status conditions, with sleep being particularly annoying since you don't attack on the turn you wake up. But the worst things about this game are the moves Wrap, Bind, and Fire Spin, because when your Pokemon is hit by them, they literally can't move for 2 to 5 turns. I've seriously had some fights last 10 minutes because the Pokemon paralyzed me and kept spamming Wrap.
Well, I've been going for about 17 minutes now, so I guess I should actually get into the differences between red version and blue version.
Really, all it is the Pokemon you can find. A few examples are in red, you find Growlithe, Oddish, and Ekans, while in blue, you find Vulpix, Bellsprout, and Sandshrew. This means if you want to complete the Pokedex, you'll have to use the Game Boy's link cable. This allows you to connect with other players, and you can either battle each other or trade Pokemon. But if you don't have any friends, like me, you're gonna need both versions of the game and 2 systems. Along with the version exclusives, there's a couple of moments where you need to choose between 2 separate Pokemon. Early on, you have to choose between 2 fossils, which you can resurrect into Pokemon later in the game. There's this Karate dude who will give you either a Hitmonlee or a Hitmonchan if you beat him, and the Pokemon Eevee actually has 3 different evolutions depending on which special stone you give it. If you give it a Water Stone, it'll evolve into the Water type, Vaporeon. If you give it a Thunder Stone, it'll evolve into the Electric type, Jolteon. And if you give it a Fire Stone, it'll evolve into the Fire type, Flareon. Which is what I did, because I love Flareon. Look at him, he's so fluffy. But yeah, not all Pokemon evolve by level up. There's a handful that evolve using special stones, which you can buy from this department store. There's 5 stones total, and they can evolve more Pokemon than just Eevee. The Fire Stone will evolve Growlithe into Arcanine and Vulpix into Ninetales. The Thunder Stone will evolve Pikachu into Raichu. The Water Stone will evolve Staryu into Starmie, Shellder into Cloyster, and Poliwhirl into Poliwrath. And the Leaf Stone will evolve Gloom into Vileplume, Weepinbell into Victreebel, and Execute into Exeggutor. There's also the rare Moonstone, which can't be purchased. You have to find it in the wild. This will evolve Nidorino into Nidoking, Nidorina into Nidoqueen, Clefairy into Clefable, and Jigglypuff into Wigglytuff. Stones can be used on the Pokemon at any time, but they generally stop learning moves by level up after they're used, so you want to hold off until the Pokemon learns any moves you want. Some Pokemon also evolve if you trade them with another person. Haunter will evolve into Gengar, Kadabra will evolve into Alakazam, Graveler will evolve into Golem, and Machoke will evolve into Machamp.
I guess the only thing left to discuss is, well, The Pokemon I ended up using.
Well, like I said earlier, I chose Charmander for my starter, which eventually evolves into a Charmeleon, and then again into a Charizard, which is one of my favorite Pokemon of all time. Yeah, I know everyone hates it now because of its popularity, but it gets that popularity for a reason. It's awesome. Continuing my cliche streak, I caught a Pikachu because I've always loved it, and hey, its evolution, Raichu, is probably the best option for an electric type in this game, especially early on. I caught an Oddish because both it and Gloom are solid enough, and Vileplume is easily the best grass type you can use if you don't pick Bulbasaur. The combination of Sleep Powder and Mega Drain in this game is amazing. For my water type, I caught a Magikarp and did some quality training to get a Gyarados because hey, this thing is awesome and I love it. I also caught a Cubone because I've always liked ground types, and its evolution Marowak is one of my favorite Kanto Pokemon. And for my last team member, I decided to go with Dratini, which along with its evolutions is literally the only dragon type in the game. It first evolves quickly, so I had a Dragonair for most of the playthrough until the very end where it finally evolved into a Dragonite, which in terms of stats is one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. It's not amazing in Gen 1 though, since literally the only Dragon-type move is Dragon Rage, which does 40 HP of damage every time. It's weird, but Dragonite is still awesome, and that's all that matters.
Now we can finally get to the actual adventure, or at least what happens when you leave your home of Pallet Town.
After Professor Oak gives you your first Pokemon, you set off on Route 1. Shortly after, you reach Viridian City, which does have a gym, but the leader isn't there. You can't go further because of a cranky old man, so you have to stop by the Pokemart and grab a parcel for Oak. Bring it back to him, and he gives you your Pokedex, and now you can buy Pokeballs, letting you catch Pokemon. Go back to Viridian City, and if you head west, you can fight James, though this is optional. All he has is a starter and a Pidgey he caught. If you head north, you reach Viridian Forest, and it's pretty straightforward. Outside, you reach Pewter City, and the first gym leader, Brock, who specializes in rock-type Pokemon. The gyms all have extra trainers to fight, and most of them have some kind of puzzle, but this one it's just a straight path. Brock himself is really easy. If you chose Bulbasaur or Squirtle, you'll demolish him, but even with Charmander, you should be able to beat him since its Pokemon have terrible special stats, and they don't actually know any rock moves. You then head east and find a large cave called Mountain Moon. It's not that big, but it takes ages to get through since every square can cause an encounter, and almost all of them are Zubats. This cave is also where you encounter Team Rocket for the first time and choose your fossil. You can take the Dome Fossil, which becomes Kabuto, or the Helix Fossil, which becomes Omanite. And personally, I took the Dome Fossil.
Why yes, I am a heretic.
Exit Mount Moon, and you reach Cerulean City, where you have another fight with James. His Pidgey is now a Pidgeotto, and he has both a Rattata and an Abra. He mentions something about a guy named Bill, so you head north and discover Bill has turned himself into a Pokemon. You want me to turn you back? Eh, I'm good. Oh, it's not really an option. Okay, bye. You unfortunately have to use the machine to turn him back, and as thanks he gives you an SS ticket. Back in town, you can challenge the gym leader, Misty, who uses water-type Pokemon. Her gym puzzle is also straightforward, just walk above the pool. You find a house that's been robbed by a Team Rocket grunt, so you beat him and get the TM back, which is now yours to keep. Now head south and discover you can't reach the next town because the guards are thirsty. Yeah, seriously. So you have to take this underground path to go underneath it and reach Vermilion City. Here you can use the ticket to board the SS Anne, which is having a party. Fight a bunch of trainers, and at the end you find James. His team composition is the same, but now his Abra, Rattata, and Starter have evolved. Beat him, help the captain with some issues, and he gives you Cut as thanks. After a wonderful sight, you leave the ship and it departs. Now we can challenge the gym, and it has easily the worst puzzle in the game. You have to find 2 switches in these trash cans to open a door, but you have to find them both in a row or else the lock resets. It's random every time and annoying as hell. Once you get through, you fight Lieutenant Surge, who uses electric-type Pokemon. Talk to this dude in the Pokemon fan club to get a bike voucher, and go through Diglett Cave, which is a cave filled entirely with Diglets. Speak to Professor Oak's assistant, who will give you Flash, go back through the cave, and find the way east is blocked by a sleeping Snorlax. So we gotta go back to Cerulean, pick up a bike, and head east from there. Eventually you'll reach Rock Tunnel, a cave that's really annoying because it's impossible to see without Flash and filled with dead ends. But thankfully at this point you can buy repels, which prevent random encounters. Outside is Lavender Town, the creepiest part of the game. This town is referred to as the gravesite for Pokemon, and this large tower is where people pay their respects, confirming that Pokemon can in fact die. There's actually 2 theories that come from this place. One is a real-life story that the Japanese version of the town's music apparently had special frequencies that caused children to go insane. Yeah, that's just not true. And the other has to do with James. You find him inside the tower where he once again challenges you to a battle, and the Raticate he just used is no longer in his party. Many people theorize that he was in the tower because his Raticate died after your last battle.
I highly doubt that was actually intended by the developers, but it's still interesting to think about.
His team also now has 2 members that change depending on the starters you picked. By default, he is either an Execute, a Growlithe, or a Gyarados, but one of these is switched out for his starter. If you chose Bulbasaur, he has Charizard instead of Growlithe. If you chose Charmander, he has Blastoise instead of Gyarados. And if you chose Squirtle, he has Venusaur instead of Exeggutor. You find out that Team Rocket has invaded the tower, and they killed a baby Cubone's mother. So Mr. Fuji, owner of the Pokemon House, which takes in abandoned Pokemon, went to get rid of them. You can't climb the tower yet, though, because it's filled with ghosts. Yeah, just straight up ghosts. And your Pokemon can't fight them, so you'll have to come back later. Head west and go through another underground tunnel to reach Celadon City. If you keep going west, you can get Fly, and in town you can find the department store, get an Eevee, buy drinks for the guards, and find a peeping Tom outside the gym. Go inside and use Cut to reach Erica, who specializes in grass types. This fight is insanely annoying because of Rap. After beating her, you need to go to the game corner where you can earn coins to buy things like TMs or rare Pokemon. Problem is, it's just straight up slot machine, so it takes ages. Gambling in a kid's game. But under the game corner, you'll find Team Rocket's hideout. Navigate these spin tiles that take ages, find an elevator key, and at the bottom you meet the leader of Team Rocket, Giovanni. He's pathetically easy to fight. After you beat him, you get the Sylph Scope, which lets you identify ghosts. Head back to Lavender Town and begin climbing the tower. Fight nothing but Ghastly and Haunter, and right before the top, you find another ghost. Use the Sylph Scope and discover it's the ghost of the Marowak that Team Rocket killed. Lay it to rest by attacking it, fight the Team Rocket grunts, and bring Mr. Fuji back to his house. As thanks, he gives you a Poke Flute, which you can use to wake up the Snorlax, and the other Snorlax that's next to Celadon. Travel down Cycling Road, which you need the bike in order to do, and at the bottom you reach Fuchsia City.
Fuchsia City has one of the more interesting areas of the game, the Safari Zone.
Here you have to catch Pokemon without fighting them. It's home to some of the rarest Pokemon in the game, like Scyther and Dratini, but they're really hard to catch and can run away at any time. You can throw a rock at them, which makes them easier to catch but more likely to run away, or throw bait, which makes them harder to catch but less likely to run away. You only have 30 Safari Balls to use, and you can only take 500 steps or else you get kicked out. Inside, you'll find a set of gold teeth, and if you make it to the end, you'll get Surf. Give the gold teeth to the Warden to get strength, and now we can fight the gym. It's filled with invisible walls that are very clearly outlined, and in the center lies Koga, who uses Poison-type Pokemon. Although his team is weird since it's full of repeats, and yet Poison is literally the most abundant type in the game. Why did they do this? He'll also usually end the fight by making his final Pokemon use Self-Destruct, which KOs itself. Yeah, nice going there, buddy. Now that you have a drink, you can finally reach Saffron City, only to discover Team Rocket has taken over and invaded the HQ of a company called Silphco. You have to go inside, fight all the grunts, find this card key that lets you open doors, and use these warp tiles that teleport you all over the place. Eventually, you'll find James, who challenges you to another battle.
I think we have more pressing issues here, dude.
His Pidgeotto is now a Pidgeot, his Kadabra is now an Alakazam, and his starter is now fully evolved. After you beat him, this dude gives you a Lapras as thanks for trying to save the company, and you fight Giovanni again. He's still really easy. Team Rocket leaves town, and the president of Silphco gives you a Master Ball, which can catch any Pokemon without fail. Now we can go to the gym and navigate more warp tiles to fight Sabrina, who uses Psychic-type Pokemon. But she also has a Venomoth, which is a Poison Bug type. That literally makes no sense. There are plenty of other Psychic types in the game. Why does she have this? Anyway, she should be hard, but she's actually pretty easy because her Kadabra and Alakazam will spam Recover when they have full health. Just hit them with a decent physical attack and they're done. You can also challenge the Fighting Dojo to get your Hitmon, and I chose Hitmonchan. Now we head back to Fuchsia City or Pallet Town, it's your choice, and surf to Cinnabar Island. Here you find the lab that lets you revive your fossil Pokemon and the abandoned Pokemon Mansion. This place has a bunch of diary entries that tell about scientists finding a mysterious ancient Pokemon called Mew, and they apparently used its DNA to create another Pokemon called Mewtwo, but Mewtwo ended up being stronger than any other Pokemon in the world, and they were unable to control it.
This is actually a really cool method of storytelling, but it's sadly the only time this happens in the game.
In the basement, you find a key to the gym.
Why the hell was this in here?
Go inside, and you have to answer trivia questions. If you get them right, you move on, and if you get them wrong, you have to fight a trainer. The gym leader is Blaine, who uses Fire-type Pokemon, and he's the dumbest trainer in the game, as he will regularly use Super Potions on Pokemon with full health. You see what I mean when I say Gen 1 AI is trash? Once you beat him and have 7 badges, you can finally return to Verinian City and challenge the last gym. It has spin tiles like the Rocket Hideout, and it's filled with trainers that use a bunch of really strong Pokemon. And the gym leader is revealed to be none other than Giovanni. Yep, the leader of Team Rocket is also the strongest gym leader. He uses Ground-type Pokemon, and thankfully he actually tries now. Once you defeat him, he decides to officially disband Team Rocket, because I'm guessing he can't accept the fact that he lost to a child 3 times. With all 8 badges in hand, it's time to head for the Pokemon League. After one last battle with James, who has a Rhyhorn now, you have all your badges inspected and travel through Victory Road. It's a giant cave filled with some of the strongest trainers in the game. Once you make it through to Indigo Plateau, you can finally challenge the Elite Four.
Well, after about 4 hours of grinding.
The Elite Four consists of Lorelei, who uses Ice types, Bruno, who uses Fighting types, Agatha, who uses Ghost types, and Lance, who uses Dragon types. Although none of them actually have single-type teams. Lorelei has a Slowbro, which is a Water and a Psychic type. Bruno has 2 Onyxes for some reason, even though there were 2 Fighting types that were perfectly available. Agatha is more of a Poison specialist than a Ghost specialist, and Lance is as much of a Flying specialist as he is a Dragon specialist. But once you beat Lance, you find out there's one more trainer that you have to face. The current Pokemon champion, James. That's right, he somehow got here and became champion before you, so now it's time to beat him one last time. His entire team is fully evolved, so he can be dangerous, but if you know your type matchups, you should be fine. After you beat him, Professor Oak shows up and congratulates you, and he tells James that he lost because he forgot to treat his Pokemon with love and trust. He then takes you back here, and your Pokemon are inducted into the Hall of Fame. And with that, you officially become the Pokemon League champion.
But we're not done quite yet. We still have a few loose ends to tie up, specifically the legendary Pokemon.
Legendary Pokemon are Pokemon you can only obtain one of, but they're the strongest Pokemon in the game. First, we have the 3 legendary birds. The Ice-type Articuno, which lies in the Seafoam Islands, the Electric-type Zapdos, which lies in an abandoned power plant, and the Fire-type Moltres, which lies in Victory Road. There's also Mew, that Pokemon I mentioned earlier, which is a mythical Pokemon, meaning it's a legendary Pokemon that isn't found natively in the game. However, you can acquire it via some complicated glitch. But there's one left. After beating the League, you gain access to Cerulean Cave. It has the highest level wild Pokemon of any area, and at the end, you find the strongest Pokemon in the entire game, Mewtwo. This thing is insanely powerful and has some amazing moves. Plus, it can heal itself, so you're gonna want to use the Master Ball on it. And with that, we are officially done.
Game over. Pokemon Red and Blue have not aged very well. They're incredibly simple, unbalanced, and absolutely filled with glitches. I can only really recommend these games to hardcore Pokemon fans. Otherwise, there's no reason to play them anymore. If you want the definitive Kanto region experience, either play the Game Boy Advance remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, or Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee for the Switch. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering why I didn't bring up the enhanced version, Pokemon Yellow. Well, that version is actually quite different from the original Red and Blue, so I'm gonna save it for another time. For now, my cockfighting organization has gotten me into a bit of legal trouble, but don't worry, I have the perfect thing that'll smoothen it all over. Why didn't this work?